timer to get started. Welcome to the May version of the Homestead Academy. And we're lucky enough today to have our Extension Water Quality Specialist, Dr. Chris Obropta. Chris has got a lot of impressive titles. He's in charge of the Water Resources Program. You're in charge of the Water Resource or the Water Research Institute, right, Chris?
Yeah.
And he's been here for almost as long as I have, so he's an old timer.
A lifetime.
Yeah, lifetime. Okay. And Chris does a lot of work in the area of water quality. And one of the things that comes up with us once in a while is about, harvesting rainwater and using it again out of rain barrels, things like that. So Chris is going to address that, and I'm sure a multitude of other topics. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
Okay, let me see if I can share my screen here.
Just while we're turning it over to Chris, I want to remind everybody you're welcome to post your questions in the chat as soon as they come up, and we will address them at the end.
Okay, can you see that okay? So fine.
Yeah, we got you.
Okay, great. Can you hear me all right? It's good?
You're good.
Yep.
Okay, so this is my contact information, and that's my website. If you're going to send me an email, I suggest you also copy Holly DeMuro on the email. You can find her name from my staff page. I get about 120 emails a day, so it's good if Holly gets copied on it. She makes sure I get back to people. You know who we are, Cooperative Extension, so I don't need to show you this slide. I run the Water Resources Program. I've been here since 2002. This is our mission statement. It has all the right buzzwords in it for Rutgers, engaging and empowering communities, employing practical science-based solutions. The whole point of this is that my job is to extend the knowledge of the university out to the people of the state, to help them solve their problems, focusing a lot on stormwater issues, water quality issues, flooding issues. So we started as the water quality folks, and then we got into so much more since I joined Rutgers here. So today we're going to talk about rainwater harvesting, and really this is a topic that's become very, very popular. Focus a lot on this whole sustainable living aspect, and we'll talk about each one of these. Sustainability from a standpoint of what we're trying to accomplish in our lives, I think, has really three components. There's an economic component, there's an environmental component, and there's a social component. And where these three bubbles kind of overlap is in that middle. That's the sustainability. So if you're thinking about the economics, the environment, and the social components, and you're doing it right way, you can have a sustainable future. And that's what this is all about, rainwater harvesting. So lots of different ways to harvest rainwater. We've got the rain barrels, which probably a lot of you have. We have these underground cisterns, and then we have above ground cisterns. So now the rain barrel is a small feature. It's about 55 gallons. These other things could be much, much larger in size, and I'll show you more about that in a minute. So the first thing we're trying to do is we're focused on conserving water. New Jersey is a water-rich state. We get over 40 inches of rain a year, but we are also the most densely populated state. About 50% of the water we use comes from groundwater. The average resident uses about 100 gallons per day, and in the summer that jumps up to about 185 gallons per day. So when you couple what the people are using, 9 million people in New Jersey are using, coupled with the 10,000 farms in New Jersey, we have a lot of water being used in the state. Now, what's interesting is the climate's changing in New Jersey, and I'm sure you've heard about that. One thing we're being told about climate change is that we're going to get more intense storm events, followed by longer dry periods. So for example, it'll rain on Monday, we'll get maybe 2.5 inches of rain on a Monday, and it may not rain for another 2 weeks, right? So that's what we're going to see as the climate continues to change, those longer dry periods between the rainfall events. So making rainwater harvesting something that we might want to consider a lot more in New Jersey. So, we're trying to promote this sustainable lifestyle, prevent water pollution. If we're capturing water in a tank and not letting it run across the ground and picking up pollution, carrying it into our rivers, that's a good thing. We can extend the life and reliability of our septic systems and our public and private infrastructure. And then, the other thing is it postpones the need to fund bigger water projects in the state. So if we can, through conservation, and rainwater harvesting, reduce the amount of water we use, then we have to build fewer reservoirs and fewer pumping stations and things like that. So it makes it a little bit more economical on a statewide basis. So how much water can we harvest from one rooftop? Well, here's an example of 40 by 20 foot roof, 800 square feet, 1 inch of rain gives you about 500 gallons of water. Now the problem with that is your rain barrel only holds about 50 of those gallons. So if you want to harvest all that water, you need something a little bit more than just one rain barrel, right? But on an annual basis, 42 inches of rain a year, you're getting over 20,000 gallons of water that runs off that rooftop. Okay. Lots of other ways to conserve water. So EPA actually came up with this thing called water sense. You know how they have they have something very similar for energy. So now they have this for water. So when you go to buy a toilet or a washing machine, look for that water sense logo, and it tells you that that product actually is better for the environment, conserves water, doesn't use as much, right? So very much similar to the energy savers stuff that we have. So when we think about conserving water, adjusting watering for conditions, how many times have we driven through a development and seen a sprinkler going in a rainstorm event? So not a good idea. Using native plants. Native plants are adapted to this climate, and we have a talk coming up, I think, in June on native plants. Very important because they use less water, they require less chemicals to survive, and they do much better. Putting mulch around the plants to hold the moisture in place, very important. And then watering early in the morning. Deep root watering in the morning really kind of saves a lot of water. When you're irrigating with the sprinklers at noontime, a lot of that's just evaporating. You're just wasting water. Indoor, you look for the EPA Water Sense logo, whether it's a shower head, a washer, dryer, or a faucet. And these tend to use a lot less water, a lot more energy efficient. So these are things that we look at, faucet aerators, things like that. So a lot of people have this already in their homes. I know that low flow shower head can be a pain in the ass sometimes, but it's good for the environment and use less water. So preventing flooding is another issue with rainwater harvesting. Now, like I said, we're not harvesting a lot of water that's going to prevent flooding, but every drop that we can hold back is going to help out. Here's a typical house in New Jersey, and we can see it rains on the rooftop, goes down the gutter, goes down the downspout, it's piped all the way to the road, and then goes into the catch basin. Every drop of water that hits that roof winds up in that catch basin, winds up in a stream. We say this roof is directly connected to the stream. So we want to disconnect that. One way is we can cut that downspout off and let the water run across the lawn. The lawn will absorb the first half inch, maybe inch of water. Another way is to install a rain barrel to capture that water. So you can see here's another way that the downspouts going onto the driveway, running down the driveway, going into road, going into street. So once again, the rooftop is directly connected to the stream, and we're trying to prevent that. That's a big thing we're trying to do in New Jersey. Here's another example here. You see it's being piped out to the road. Not only is it a problem in the winter when it starts ponding on the road and flash freezes, you have issues there, but it also deteriorates the asphalt, ruins the road. So if we can absorb that water, the better off we are. So here's one way of doing it is with that rain barrel or cistern, something to that effect. So now it's no longer going to the inlet, it's going into the barrel, and then the barrel kind of overflows onto the lawn. The lawn will absorb the excess water, right? So that's what we're trying to accomplish here, right? And the final piece that we're looking at for rainwater harvesting is focusing on water pollution, right? So the big thing with stormwater is it rains, the water hits the ground. As it's traveling over the ground, it's picking up pollution and carrying it to the catch basin and ultimately carrying it to the stream. So by harvesting that water, you're preventing it from running across the ground, picking up that pollution, and you're using the water. So it's a way to kind of stop and break up that process by disconnecting that rooftop, having you go into a rain barrel or a cistern instead of running out across the lawn and across the driveway. So we're trying to avoid there, right? Other benefits for rainwater harvesting, the plants love the water. There's no salt in it or chemicals in it. It's highly acidic pH, so it does very well for the plants. A lot of people are harvesting rainwater in rain barrels and using it to water their plants in their house, so it's not just outdoor use. So also when we have periods of drought, you can use that rainwater. And like I said, with climate change, you're going to get a lot more heavy rainfall and longer drought periods between. So you'll have that rainwater that you've harvested to be able to water the plants, and you won't have to use that potable water that may be coming from the city with chlorine in it, which is not good for your plants. So let's talk about rainwater harvesting systems. We showed you the slide already, the 3 different types of tanks that we're looking at. There's lots of different types of rain barrels. And you can see here, we used to do workshops at Rutgers, build a rain barrel workshop. We would get about 500 of these pickle barrels, and you can see the one in the lower left-hand corner here. See, I turn this pointer on. This barrel here, we get something like this. We drill a hole in the bottom, put a spigot in, we cut the top out, put a screen on top. This is another example of one painted. Here's other ones that are also recycled barrels. Or, you could buy them at places like Home Depot or Lowe's, or order them online. This is a barrel too, a kind of Greek column or Roman column look. This big urn's another barrel. So lots of different types of barrels. We used to do these workshops. People would come in, they'd build a rain barrel, they drill the hole, they do the caulk, they put the thing in, they put the spigot in, and then there's always some crazy person trying to squeeze 2 rain barrels in the back of their Prius. By the way, 2 rain barrels don't fit in a Prius, and I got to follow you home my pickup truck, which is a bad thing. But we used to do these workshops all the time. The problem was it's hard to get students to wash out those barrels. Those barrels are loaded with pickle juice and things like that. It's just a very disgusting kind of job. We found that a undergrad student will wash about 49 barrels before they'll quit. And then we had to haul the barrels all over the state, which required a trailer and a truck, and it just became a very expensive proposition. But if you can find a recycled barrel, it's a great way to go. Other types of rainwater harvesting, these cisterns. So this could be above the ground or below the ground. And you can see the different components here. You've got the drainage area, the roof is draining into it. You've got this thing called the first flush diverter. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but the idea with that is the first few gallons that wash off the roof will fill this plastic pipe. Once this pipe is filled, the rest of the water will go into the tank and fill the tank up. The tank has an overflow here. So once it gets to a certain spot, it'll overflow, and you direct that overflow someplace where you want it to go. Sometimes we'll direct that overflow into a rain garden or some other landscape feature. And you can see the cistern tank, usually a black plastic tank. There's a spigot in the bottom that we have, so we can use that to fill up our watering cans, or hook a soaker hose to, or we've also hooked pumps to it and pump the water around. Right now, what happens too is there's lots of debris on the roof, so you do get some sediment settling out in the tank that you have to drain the tank every once in a while and vacuum that out. And there's usually access from the top where you can get to that stuff. So here's a bunch of different types of cisterns. This is a more complicated first flush diverter. So this will hold about 20 gallons of water in these pipes here. So the water will come in here, fill these pipes up. And once these pipes are filled, the rest of the water will fill up the tank. This has a little spigot on the bottom, and after a storm event, this will just drip water out until these pipes become drained, so ready for the next storm event. This is one we built in, I think it was East Greenwich, down in South Jersey. So these tanks are hooked up to the roof. It's also hooked up to potable water. So what happens is when these tanks are filled with rainwater, they use to water the community gardens by the school. If they run out of water, they have potable water hooked up to the tanks, and then the tanks could fill up about a third way with potable water. The issue with this is that we only have the irrigation system hooked up to these tanks. So if there's no water in it, we can't irrigate at all. So we have this backup system of using city water for that. This one's underground. So you have a tank underground, and you have this kind of storage container here that hold excess water. And then there's a pump in here that pumps the water out. So it's pretty simple. This is one that we actually built in Clark, New Jersey. This is the Public Works building. So water runs off the rooftop, fills this tank up. I believe it's a 10,000 gallon tank. There's a little spigot here on the bottom. They have a little shed here now with a pump in it. And the Public Works building is right next to the high school. Now, Clark does not have a commercial car wash in town. So most people wash their cars by having the kids do it on Saturday morning, the volunteer car washes, the Girl Scouts, the Boy Scouts, the soccer team, the band. So in this case, what happens is they pull up the car, they pour a concrete pad in the parking lot, they pull up the car onto the pad, someone hands a flyer to the person in the car saying, "Welcome to the green car wash. We're using rainwater to wash your car today." And they wash the car with the rainwater. They also have on the flyer other ways they can conserve water. So when you go home, they can follow that. The soapy water goes from the concrete pad into a concrete channel and goes all the way down into a rain garden. And this rain garden actually treats the water, the soapy water, removes about 95% of the soapiness of the water, so it can be discharged. So it becomes a really, really nice system. I'm not sure why we don't have this in every school, wherever they do these nonprofit car washes. So here's one that's built at a community garden. Bill was asking about urban agriculture earlier. There are a lot of community gardens in some of our urban areas. This is actually in Newark, New Jersey. So it's a vacant lot where they have these garden beds. So what happens is we kind of go in and you know, knock on a neighbor's door and say, we'd like to harvest rainwater from the rooftop for the community garden next door. The first question is, what does that look like? And we say, well, it looks like Rutgers coming in, putting all new gutters on your house. And like, okay, great. When can you start? And then we use it to fill up the barrel, and they use this to water the garden. You see the overflow here going to the stone area. This is actually going to be a rain garden here that we're installing. Now, what happens too is eventually these vacant lots may get developed. So if that happens, we drain this tank down, we take the piping off, and we throw this tank on the back of a pickup truck, and we take it to the next community garden. So we never lose this infrastructure. And this tank, I believe, is about 2,000 gallons. Here's a little bigger one. This is in Patterson. Now you can see this roof is pretty beat up, so it's getting a lot of debris in this tank from the roof. And actually, this property owner was upset by that, so they wound up actually redoing this roof so it was much cleaner. And then they run water from here across the parking lot, and there's a community garden on the other side of the parking lot that they use. So here's Amy Rowe. She's our environmental county agent in Essex and Passaic County. This is a slimline cistern. This is about 24 inches wide. This holds about 530 gallons of water. So what happens with this, it sits right next to the wall. So you still have a lot of walking space around it. The thing with the cistern is it could be a big round tank, take up a lot of, you know, a lot of the sidewalk. In this case, this could sit next to the building and still leave a lot of the sidewalk open. Okay. So rainwater harvesting, use and care. You're not supposed to use the rain barrel or cistern water for cooking or drinking. Having said that, when Hurricane Sandy came through, a fellow contacted me, one of the guys who actually built a rain barrel at one of our workshops, and he was taking the water from his rain barrel and he was boiling it, and then he was using it to make spaghetti. So he was pretty happy about that. He didn't get sick. But you're not supposed to use this for cooking or drinking. The other thing that happens is a lot of people would put moss or algae killer on their rooftop to get rid of the moss. If you do that, and you're collecting rainwater from that roof, that rainwater will not just kill the moss, but also kill any plants you put on it. So you got to be very careful about that. Okay. So when you're using rainwater, you should be using it within a week or two after harvesting it, so the algae doesn't grow in it. We don't really have a huge algae problem because you see these barrels and tanks are all black. They're not clear. You don't want to use a clear barrel because in the sunlight will get in and the algae will grow. So you want to avoid that. A lot of times we're hooking soaker hoses to this. People put these barrels in, they hook their hose up and they're wondering why it doesn't spray. There's not a lot of pressure here. So you can use a soaker hose or you can hook up a pump to it. We have a lot of community gardens where we have underground pumps that we install to take the rainwater and then pump the water into an irrigation system that they can use for the gardens. Okay. You can use this water for a lot of things, watering your trees, your shrubs, your gardens. You can wash your dog, your car, your muddy feet, anything you want. I joke oftenly, people, you take the lid off, you take your cat, hold it by the tail, you dunk it a few times, you can wash your cat in the barrel. It's great. You can use it in toilet tanks, you know, when the well pump is not working. So I'm on well water. When the power goes out, you know, I don't have any water because my pump isn't working, but you can take that water from the rain barrel and use it to flush your toilet. Bird baths, another great place you can use it. So this water, it's for the most part, it's you're able to use it in a lot of different circumstances, right? So the other thing we use this for is vegetable gardens and ponds and things like that. But we want to be a little careful about what's in the water. If you're using it to water your vegetable gardens, we encourage you to water the soil, not the leaves. Now, having said that, if you're using it to water your lettuce and you get some on the leaves, you're always going to bring that stuff in the house and wash it before you eat it. So usually it's not a problem, but there are pathogens, fecal coliform E. coli that could be settled out on the roof from the bird traffic on the roof, and that could really contaminate the water, and that could get you sick if that gets on plants and you eat it. Okay, the other thing we see is petroleum hydrocarbons that can come from the shingles of the roof. The other thing we see is things like zinc, lead, chromium, arsenic. Once again, these metals are also from the roofing material or from the nails used to put the roof up. So sometimes we do some testing on this. Now, Michelle Backus, one of our county agents, I believe with a few of the other ones, did a whole study on rainwater harvesting and rain barrel water and did some testing on it. So there's a fact sheet out about that I'm sure Bill can give you access to. So caring for your rain barrel or your cistern, you really need to make sure there's screens on this, because if there's not a window screen covering the openings, you'll get mosquitoes breeding in there, and that's a horrible thing. So you want to be very careful to make sure that screen is on there. Place it every couple of years, because the window screen will eventually deteriorate and tear apart. So you gotta take care of that. You got to remove debris from the screen. So like you have a downspout, you can see this one in the back coming in the barrel. If there's leaves on the roof, this could clog up the whole top of the barrel with leaves. So you got to go out and make sure that that's clean, so the water can get into the barrel through that window screen. The other thing, in the winter, you need to winterize it, right? Usually from December, January, and February, we're not using our rain barrels anymore, because if we get temperatures that dip below freezing, it turns into one big ice cube. Now, this is a rain barrel that Lisa, who works for me, had at her house. Her husband, Paul, went over to the winery, got one of those really nice oak barrels. They were selling them very inexpensively. So he built a rain barrel out of it. So Lisa told him, he said, listen, Paul, it's getting cold. You need to bring that barrel in. You need to drain it. You need to drain it. Yeah, I'll get to it. Well, he didn't get to it. And the bottom of it froze. It broke the bottom of the barrel out. And now you see how sad the dog is. You know, he used to drink water out of that barrel. Now it's broken and busted up. And Paul had to sleep in a doghouse with the dog for a while. Also, cleaning the barrel out is important, you know. So long brush, some water, some diluted bleach is usually good to use, you know. Make sure you rinse it out. Very, very good. So where do you get barrels? So usually you're looking for food grade barrels, 55-gallon drums, the high density plastic barrels. So you can see, I like the ones on the top because they have that lid on it that you can unscrew, and then you can cut the hole in the lid, put the screen over it, and then screw the lid back on. The next one down, you see a lot of these are used at car washes. They have the soap from the car wash comes in these, right? So a lot of these are given away by car washes. And some people converted garbage cans into rain barrels. Now, it's a little tricky because the plastic in a garbage can might be a little flimsy. So you have to get a pretty sturdy garbage can to do that. So there's lots of different ways. There's a lot of build a rain barrel workshops, even though Cooperative Extension doesn't do them anymore. Often you could find them from the AmeriCorps ambassadors will do those. So you'll see that. There's also rain barrel rebate programs that I've seen. New Jersey Water Supply Authority used to do one. So if you bought a rain barrel, depending on the size, they would either give you $65 back or $85 back, depending on how big the barrel was. And you just had to take a picture of it being installed and send the receipt in, and they would send you a check. So that's important. Okay. So components of rain barrels, rainwater harvesting system. I like showing this slide because it shows the possible potential, you know, and you think about a whole house system. So now, you know, we're harvesting rainwater in a tank underground. We're pumping that tank back up to a tank in the attic, and then we're using that water to flush our toilets. We're using that water for our washing machines. We're using that water for outside watering of gardens. So you can see we have like a duplicate water system in the house to take this harvested rainwater and use that. Now, not a lot of houses have this. We see a lot of this in the out in the Southwest, where they have very little rain. You know, out there they get about maybe 8 or 10 inches of rain a year, where we get 40 to 50. So they're harvesting a lot of water. A lot of them have a dual piping system in their house to take recycled water and bring it into their house to use it to flush their toilets and things like that, right? So components of the rain barrel. So, you know, you have a downspout, you have an inlet with a screen on it. So usually its top has a hole, and you can see here There's a window screen on there. You have an overflow, so if it fills up the top, it overflows this way, and then you have the faucet down here hooked up to a hose. And we usually keep it off the ground a little bit so you can get that hose in there, put a bucket under there. So when you raise this up, you really need to put on something very sturdy. You can see here, in this case, they have a daisy chain of barrels. So now instead of just having 50 gallons, they've got 250 gallons of storage because they have 5 barrels in series, and then the spigot's at the end. So this fills all the barrels up uniformly, and then you have a spigot down here that draws water from those barrels. Okay, so it's very, very nice. If you want to have 5 barrels sitting next to your house like that, it's okay. Probably put a little screen in front of that if you wanted to. Okay, so cisterns, a little bit bigger, mostly industrial commercial properties. Agriculture is a big place. We see cisterns capturing large volumes of water. This is a beautiful tank here. You can see it's a cedar tank, 6,500 gallons. A little bit more complex than a rain barrel, can be above the ground or below the ground. Here's the components of a cistern, and we can see it here. Same kind of beginning. You got the gutter, downspout. Here we have a filter, and basically it's just a screen, right? The screens out the leaves or whatever coming off the roof, so it'll screen it out there. Comes in here, fills up your first flush diverter. There's a little nipple here on the bottom that'll drip the water out between storm events. Then it'll go into the tank and fills the tank up. Okay, so here you have an overflow for the tank. Here you have a metering system, so it can tell how deep the water is in the tank. You got a pump in here, it's pumping it into a distribution system. So it becomes a very complex system. And you can see how it's being used here. These pumps are pretty easy. They're basic sump pumps that you would get from Home Depot. You might have one in your house, in your basement. Very similar to that. That's what we're trying to use here. So one question always comes up is, do I need a permit for this? And often you need to just really call your local building inspector and see if the building code allows you to do rainwater harvesting and reuse the water in the house. A lot of people, there's really no building codes that prevent you from harvesting rainwater in a rain barrel or a cistern to use it to water your garden. But if you want to start using that water and pumping it back in your house to flush the toilets and things like that, you have to talk to the plumbing department and the health code and make sure you're able to do that. This last thing here, water rights, is interesting. There was a big problem out in Boulder, Colorado. People were starting to harvest rainwater, from the rooftops, and it was illegal in Boulder because that water belonged to downstream farmers, right? So when it landed in Boulder, it went into the river, Colorado River, and went downstream, and it was their water, and these people were stealing water from those downstream farmers. Since then, they have passed ordinances and regulations that allow homeowners to do that to a certain extent. So water rights is really a big issue out west. We don't really have that here on the East Coast because we get a lot of rain here, right? So there's different components of the system. We'll go through some of these for a few minutes here. You got the roof catchment, so the rooftop that drains to the gutter, that drains to the pipe. You have these collection tanks, so you're collecting water here. You have a pre-treatment system, so usually there's some sort of first flush diverter here. It's a pre-treatment system. Then you have storage tanks, so you might collect the water in this tank and then pump it to another tank to store it in. So we have lots of different components here, and we can start looking at some of these. So pre-treatment can be very simple. It could be these gutter guards that you put on your gutters, or it's just a screen here, and you can see, this will get clogged with debris, and you have to clean that every once in a while, but it's better it comes in here than goes into your tank. So very inexpensive system. Once again, you got to make sure that you clean this out so it doesn't freeze in the winter. Another issue. Roofing is an issue. We think about where we can harvest rainwater from: asphalt shingles, treated roofs, waterproof wood, galvanized steel, all have kind of different chemicals in them associated with them. So we worry a little bit about the pH. Is the water very acidic or not, or is it getting changed because of the roof material? We're worried about heavy metals, copper, zinc, maybe the nails that you use to install the roof. Nitrate and phosphorus are also metals we worry about. Most of these just settle out of the atmosphere and they land on these hard surfaces and wash off. And then we worry about painted roofs. A painted enamel metal roof or slate roof is preferred to any of the other types of roofs. So we can really use a metal roof is much better. I've been down to Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. When I first started at Rutgers, I was given this job as a regional water quality coordinator for EPA Region 2. It was a U.S. Department of Agriculture grant. So EPA Region 2 is New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. So my first 6 months on the job, I had to go down to Puerto Rico for a week and the Virgin Islands for a week and go around and see their septic systems that were failing and see their rainwater harvesting systems. And yeah, it was a horrible thing I had to do. Yeah, but I mean, I did it because the job asked me to do it. And sitting on the beach in the Virgin Islands thinking about septic systems was very, very difficult for me. Storage tank types. So lots of different storage tank types. Plastic is the most common one, a high density plastic. Steel lined with a membrane is another one. So we'll be careful about steel tanks, because they'll rust. So you have a membrane inside. Concrete tanks are pretty common. Most of our septic systems are concrete tanks, but we can also have a concrete tank to store water in and use it. So these tanks can be indoor or outdoor. They can be automatic or passive. So automatic is interesting. In Australia, they've got a lot of these big cisterns and they have it hooked up to their cell phone. So if they're at work and they say, oh, it's supposed to rain later today, they can call their tank and they can open up the outlet and let it slowly drain out during the day. So when it rains at night, it can store more water in the tank, right? So I had a colleague in North Carolina couldn't afford that type of system. So he did some engineering calculations and he figured out if he drilled a 3/8 inch diameter hole in the bottom of the tank, after the tank was filled after a storm event, that would allow the water to drain out over the next 2 days and it'd be ready for the next storm event. The problem was people saw that water dripping out of the tank, and people kept sticking gum in there and tape in there and trying to clog that hole and kind of screwed up the whole thing he was trying to do. He actually had to put a little sign up saying, please don't block this hole. This is meant to be here, and it was his way of trying to automate it, but in a kind of a passive way. So, there's a lot of commonalities between having a rain barrel and a cistern system. The collection surfaces are the same. Pre-treatment devices are basically the same. They're just screens or filters. And then a backup supply is often used. So if your rain barrel is empty, your backup supply is supply is your water source of your house, right? The same thing with your cistern, right? So you always have some sort of backup supply of water. The cisterns are much larger in nature. They can be used for whole house distribution systems, like I showed you earlier. And then, you can have more sophisticated systems where you can filter out the water and actually use the water in different types of ways. There's a big office building in New York City called Solaris, and it has a big treatment system in the basement. So all the water goes into that treatment system and they treat the wastewater and they reuse that water. But they also have a stormwater system that collects stormwater from the roof and they reuse that water too. And they treat it to a much higher level there in New York City. So basically installing this stuff is not really that complicated, right? So what you have to do, you have to be a little bit worried about when you cut this downspout and you're going to put it in the barrel. That's great, but then come December when you want to unconnect it, you have to be able to hook this downspout back up to where it was going. All right, so you have to be careful about that and think about when you're installing it for the warmer months versus how you're going to reconnect the downspout for the colder months, right? So we often worry about the tank size and the piping that we need. A lot of the piping we're using is a plastic PVC piping. We worry a little bit about the filtering that we're doing and then installing that first flush diverter. How big does that need to be? So lots of different issues here when we're installing things. Health and safety issues are usually addressed. They have to be very careful about that. Make sure no one gets hurt, especially if you're doing an underground system. You want to make sure that whatever you're digging out isn't going to collapse on you. It's always an issue. You want to always have access to the system, right? So even if you're putting it underground or you use a big above the ground system, now if you want to get the sediment out of the bottom of this after it accumulates, how are you going to do that? Well, there's an opening in top. Can you get in that opening, get in the tank and vacuum that out? Is that something you can do? So there's different ways that you have to look at how do we have access to it so we can, the O&M, the operation and maintenance of it is very important. And the structural durability is important. you know, we see here, you've got a rain barrel that's on this little wooden platform. Eventually that wood's going to rot away and it's going to collapse. It's probably much better to put it on concrete blocks, you know. So thinking about how long things are going to last is very, very important. Okay. Other maintenance things we worry about, you know, you've got to clean these filters out. This is a clogged filter, right? You can see here, this pipe is broken. It's raining. Water's supposed to be going into the barrel. It's squirting out the sides. So that's a problem. The other thing here is you've got water coming from the roof and filling this barrel up. It's just overflowing. Well, you think about what's going into this barrel. You have a 3-inch square downspout, right? Water flowing in, but then you have a 1-inch diameter hose going out. So, you know, the outlet of this barrel should be at least the same size as the inlet, right? So if it's filled, water coming in can go out as fast as it's coming in, so it doesn't cause this problem. And you see the water coming all over the place. Now, this usually isn't a problem. If the water's coming down, it's going away from the house, but sometimes it'll go down along the foundation and could flood out your basement. So that's an issue there. Okay. So cisterns and rain barrels, basic maintenance, inspecting it, making sure it's not leaking, making sure that the sunlight isn't getting in it so you don't get that algae to grow, checking access points for vermin, really more mosquitoes than anything else. Even that overflow hose that may be 5 feet long, you still have to put a little screen on the end of that hose where it goes into the barrel so mosquitoes don't crawl up the hose and get into the barrel. We've seen that actually happen. Maintenance of outlets, a few inches above the bottom of the cistern, so making sure that you have access to those spigots on the bottom, right? Inspection, maintenance of overflow protection. So when it overflow, do you know where it's going? Is it safe, or is it that barrel that we just saw where it's overflowing and going down the side of the building into the foundation? Chlorination of the barrel. So the Rutgers fact sheet recommends you put a little bit of chlorine in the barrel, you know, every few months to make sure you don't have any of that, any of those pathogens growing. Drainage and removal of sediment from the tank. So once again, drain it down, get in there, vacuum out that sediment. Usually it's not too bad because you have those filters going in. So that may be something you only have to do once every few years. But that's something always to think about. And actually cleaning the inside of the tank, sometimes you might want to do that because it can get a buildup of grit and debris on the inside. So that's it. I want to show you a video too, if I can. Is that okay if I show a video? What do you think?
Yeah, you're fine, Chris. You got
Yeah,
time.
there's some time still. Okay, so let me try to figure out how to do that, because I used to know how to do this, but let's see. Can you guys see that?
We can see it.
It says homestead economics. I don't know what that really means, but okay, tell me if you could hear it. Is that good?
Hey there, guys, welcome back. Today I want to take you on a tour of my whole house rainwater harvesting system. It's about 11,500 gallons in capacity and accounts for 90% of my family's water needs. It's been working well for the last 6 years, and overall it's a pretty simple system. So let me grab the camera, I'll take you around and kind of tell you a little bit about it.
To start the tour off, we'll begin in my front yard. Actually, you know what? Let's begin with a diagram, just so you understand how this system works. You're going to notice as I walk you around my house that many of the downspouts go directly into the ground. This is what's known as a wet pipe system, meaning there's going to be water in the pipes during the entire process of transferring water. There's no pumps required. Basically, the water transfers because there's a difference in the level of the inlet port and the outlet port. I'll show you here in just a second how the water flows, and then you'll see the difference in level. Get some great artwork in there. Okay, so you'll see there's approximately the level of the inlet, and then there's the level of the outlet. The difference between these levels is what moves the water. So now that you understand that, now let's go for the walk around tour. To start the tour off, we'll begin with the largest component of my rainwater harvesting system, and that's my corrugated metal roof. From the roof, the rainwater passes through a series of gutters and PVC pipes to one of 4 eventual holding tanks. The first of these tanks is my 1,100-gallon culvert cistern. This is definitely the coolest looking tank, and that's why it's on the front side of my house. It receives its water from gutters on either side of my garage and is eventually fed by this PVC pipe that you see over the garage window. And if you're wondering about the IBC tote just next to the tank, it's simply there for added capacity. Now, as we move closer to the main portion of this rainwater harvesting system, I do want to point out that we still find good uses for standard rain barrels as well. This one's set up in a corner that sometimes has water skip during very hard rains, so we like to collect every little drop as much as possible. Now moving across the yard, we'll come to the first of 7 connected PVC downspouts that comprise the majority of our water harvesting capacity. All of these downspouts are connected to a 4-inch PVC pipe that runs under the ground and eventually all the way to our main rain collection tanks. Here's number 2 and number 3 downspouts. They both collect from either side of this run of gutter. And here's a closer look of what they look like from up top. The tops of the downspouts have bell couplings, and I've simply screwed standard aluminum wire mesh there just to keep bugs and other debris out. Now we'll move on to the 4th downspout, which collects water from half of the gutter that runs along the backside of my porch. From here we'll move on to the 5th downspout, which collects water from 2 opposing sides of gutters on either side of this portion of my roof. We'll continue to follow the underground line on to the 6th and 7th downspouts. These collect water from the portion we just passed, and the one on the right collects water from the section of gutter over the garage. The final path of the water, after being collected in all 7 downspouts, occurs underground in the 4-inch PVC line that eventually makes its way to a 5,000-gallon tan rain tank. This tank is approximately 13 feet tall with about 5 to 5.5 feet buried beneath the ground. The horizontal pipe at the top of the tanks allows for the transfer of water by 2 different methods. One is by simple overflow at times of full capacity, and the other is by using a small electric pump. Now we'll move on over to the final 2 tanks in the system, which are the ones that are actually connected to my house. This one is 3,000 gallons, and the other one is 2,600 gallons. Currently, both tanks are plumbed together, and when the house pump draws water, it's drawing from both tanks at the same time. However, if I ever need to do maintenance, I can easily shut down one tank and have the pump draw off of the other one. This structure is my pump house. It's what actually holds my pressure tank and my pump that supplies all the pressure for my household needs. If it looks familiar, it was built almost entirely from scraps from my building process, and it's clad in the same corrugated metal that my roof was made out of. To transfer water from my rain tank to my other tanks, I simply use an electric pump, a short length of potable water hose, and a PVC fitting to redirect the transferring water through the overflow pipe that already exists between the tanks. Here's what it looks like. Here's some footage of a very light rain that we had during our recent monsoon. It's just barely more than a sprinkle, but as you'll see here at the rain tank, it still provides a substantial amount of water that's flowing into the tank. And here's some footage of a much more substantial rain that we got later in the monsoon season. You'll see all 3 tanks are overflowing and I absolutely have no more capacity. At the end of each rainy season, there's really only one tank that ever needs cleaning, and that's my tan rain tank. It tends to collect a little bit of the dirt and sediment from the roof, but pretty much nothing else. The rest of the system does a good job of keeping everything else out. Truly, the most difficult portion of this process is just getting in and out of the tank. If you look down at the bottom of the screen, you'll see my rope ladder that I made out of rope and PVC pipe. It works pretty good, but it is still a little bit hairy to go up and down. And this is how baby whales are born. In addition to keeping the rain tank clean, I also like to flush out the entire system of PVC pipes from time to time to reduce any sediment or dirt buildup. I can do this from one of 2 drain pipes, this one right here, or this one right here, located right next to my rain tank.
Turn it off again. So there you go. What do you think? Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah, I'm impressed, Chris. You are an extension professional.
Yeah, see that? See how that works? So, you know, I don't know. This stuff is pretty inexpensive. The tanks themselves usually cost about $2, $1.50 to $2 a gallon. You know, so you need 1,000-gallon tank. You're going to spend, you know, $1,500 to $2,000 for the tank. A lot of the tanks that people use are stuff that they find and recycle. You know, I've seen a lot of that being done. You know, PVC pipe's pretty cheap. It's about $1 a foot. So, so you can really build a system yourself, and you can see this guy went a little bit crazy overboard, but you can also see he is in the Southwest someplace. And we talks about rain as monsoon, so he's got to be in Arizona, New Mexico, someplace like that, or Southern California, you know. So so I think that's another aspect of it. But this is, I mean, this is kind of the future. If you're a homesteader like this guy is, seems like something pretty cool to do. So when you guys harvest every drop of water on your property, give me a call and I'll make a video about you. Okay, so be good. Any questions or comments?
And feel
Some
free
of
to
them
put
might
in
on
the
that.
chat. I've got one for you, Chris.
Go ahead.
If you were going to go to one of these water testing labs, you know, they do drinking water stuff,
Yeah.
would that be sufficient if you were a little bit nervous on the quality of your water? Or
Yeah,
not?
I would. So, and there's a lot of labs across New Jersey. There's New Jersey DEP has a list of certified laboratories. We take a lot of, there's a lab in Pennington. We take a lot of our stuff too, and they're fairly inexpensive. I don't think Stephanie Murphy in our soils testing lab does that kind of testing, but you know, I would, if you're nervous, I would take it there and get it tested, you know. Test isn't that expensive either. So.
And you
Chris,
can-
Leslie in the chat is asking if you could put up that slide with your contact information again. And she was also interested in the amount of water, the slide that showed the amount of water that a roof can collect, just that conversion.
Okay, let's see what we got here. Okay,
your 20,000 gallon per year slide.
yeah, so there's so this slide here, I think, right?
There you go.
Okay.
So,
Yes.
So what are your thoughts now that a lot of roofing materials are going towards, like, you know, being impregnated with like algae control and stuff? Is that going to be a no-go?
yeah, I don't know. I think that needs to be, there needs to be some testing done on that, Bill, because I'm not sure about how that's going to work. So yeah, I'm not too sure about that. I also looking at, you know, how do we, you know, a lot of people have solar panels on the roofs now too. And how does that affect it? Because there are different materials in that solar panel, and I'm worried about that stuff leaking, you know, into the tank too, into your water tank. So that makes me a little bit nervous. So, and then let me give you a slide of my contact information here. There you go. Send me an email.
We've got Jim in the chat is asking about the IBC tote that was mentioned in the video. The fact that it's clear if there's any, you know, specific difficulties with that or other challenges with IBC totes for collection.
Yeah, I think he's just using that as extra water. Usually those totes are in the back of a pickup truck and we're hauling that someplace. We've got one of those here. My group has one of those here. I think it holds I want to say 500 gallons. I'm not sure if that's right or not, but we have one here we put in the back of a pickup truck and we take it out to water our projects that we just built. As long as you're draining that within a couple of days, there's usually not a problem. Once you have water in those clear systems for 3 or 4 days, you can start seeing the algae begin to grow. And that becomes problematic because then you have to drain it down, you have to clean the whole tank out, and that can be an issue. Okay, so
The other thing, Chris, is to know the source, because they use those for like dyes and mulch, and they use them in pesticides and stuff. So make sure you know if you're getting a
yeah, that's the other issue too, is, you know, farmers use those and a lot of times they're putting fertilizer and stuff in those too, right? So yeah, you just got to be careful what it's been used for in the past. And, you know, I mean, obviously you can clean it out the best you can, but it still makes me a little nervous if it was used for dyes or something like that, you know. So
I have a question.
sure.
I have a stream on my property, and during the last storm, we had excessive amounts of rain going in to that stream, and it really raised up high. And I'm thinking about rainwater collection, but I'm wondering if there's any negative environmental impacts of not allowing that water to
get to the stream.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think everybody should be harvesting rainwater at their house in some way, shape, or form, even if it's just a 55-gallon rain barrel. I think it's a great way to help with those streams overflowing their banks. So if everybody had a rain barrel, everybody had a cistern, and there'd be less water going to those streams. You wouldn't have them overflowing the banks. You know, it's not going to help with something like Ida that came through last year, where it dumped 8 inches of rain over 6 hours. There's nothing we can do really to stop that except to get to higher ground. But most of the storms that we get in New Jersey come in rainfall events are less than 1.25 inches. Actually, 90% of the rainfall we get in New Jersey comes in storms that are less than 1.25 inches. So if you can find a way to capture that first 1.25 inches of runoff, you're going to be able to capture 90% of the rainfall that happens in the state. And that's pretty darn good, you know. I think that's what we're trying to shoot for right now. And people say, well, is me putting a rain barrel in really going to matter? You know, well, we always tell people that Chinese proverb that the mighty waterfall begins with 1 drop of water. So as many drops as we can harvest and keep out of the stream from flooding our streams, we're going to be in a lot better shape. So we often talk about people who build rain gardens to manage 1,000 square foot driveway, and that rain garden will capture, treat, and infiltrate about 250,000 gallons of stormwater a year. You know, so the idea is that, you know, if you have a bunch of those, you're gonna be able to manage a lot more. You know, so that's what we're trying to accomplish here is really trying to get people like on this call, everybody to kind of do their part. And that's what cooperative extension is all about. You know, is we try to educate folks with the best science that we have. We can't be advocates for anything other than good science. But we're also trying to get people to take personal responsibility, to engage them and think about how to do things a little differently, you know. And I think that's one thing that we're shooting for with this. And I don't know if that answers your question, Kate.
Yes, yes, it does. I mean, 620 square foot house, I don't think I'm going to divert that much water.
Yeah, I don't think so either, but it'll be good.
Yeah.
We'll do it.
And just one more question in the chat here from
Sure.
Leslie about vacuuming the tanks. If you have a large cistern like that, is that something you kind of have
Yeah,
to do?
you know, you see what he was doing in the video. He had a little sump pump in the bottom, little pump there, and he was squeegeeing the water to pump and having to pump out. You could also use a shop vac. I would have just drained that myself and shop vac the bottom of it, then maybe rinsed it out and shop vac it again, you know. That was a pretty big area though, so I guess that's why he was using that pump. But the other problem with that is you see how he got in that tank. That tank is a confined space, and you got to be very careful about climbing into tanks like that. Now, this is not going to be a big issue because you know, you can climb in that tank, water's not going to come in and drown you, you know, it's not going to be a big issue there. But the other problem is climbing out of that tank. What happens if you get stuck, you know, in a tank and you're the only one there, you know? So that's always the issue. So you think about safety. And the other thing is you always think about what's the worst possible thing that could happen? Because inevitably that might happen, you know, so you just got to be worried about that kind of stuff. Yeah, so I think that's another problem that we face when we start dealing with some of these things. And you can see the trenches that he dug for the piping in that video, they weren't very deep. Once a trench gets to be more than 3 or 4 feet deep, you have to worry about it collapsing in on you. So those trenches were pretty shallow, so it's not a big deal. If you're digging down to put one of those big tanks underground, you really need to get a professional to do that. That's not anything you can do on your own, unless you have a lot of kids. 4 or 5 kids, you know, give them shovels, get them out there, have a birthday party, everybody gets a shovel. Come on, we're gonna put an underground storage tank in. So
Oh my.
okay, what else you got? Anything else? We good?
We're good. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, no problem. I'll see you guys soon, and good luck. Send
Thanks,
me pictures if you do any of this stuff. I appreciate it, so I can use them in my video.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Thanks for your time. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Next month is native plants, right?
Next month is native plants. I expect a lot of questions about native plants for rain gardens, kind of tying them together.
Thank you, everybody.